All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Rajat Sethi. I am a management graduate and a public policy graduate. I am also, I believe that I am an active student of Indian politics. And based on certain learnings and observations that I have had in this field, I wanted to share one of the ideas that I have developed. But before that, I have a couple of disclaimers, and most important being that I do not represent any political party or an ideology in this talk. And secondly, I've tried to draw upon my set of experiences working in a couple of states in India and try to conclude a few political theories based on that. I also wanted to say that these are broad generalizations for the political system of the country. However, this is still work in progress. So, I just wanted to throw out this idea. India is clearly a politically obsessed country, as you would also believe, I think. We really like interacting on political issues and topics, but have we ever guessed as to how many active politicians are there in this country? Just to take a quick guess, what do you think is the approximate number? And by active, I mean people who recognize politics as a vocation. How many of you believe that there are approximately 10,000 active politicians? By a show of hands, how many do you think? And how many are there for a million, 10 lakhs? And how many think that it's between 5 to 10 million? Yeah, if you do a rough back of the envelope calculation, you will figure out that it's around 5 to 10 million. That's the number of active politicians in this country. While I was working on the field, one thing that really intrigued me, what happens to these 10 million politicians post-election? How do they sustain themselves? Most of them do not have a full-time job, and that is why they come in and help for 6-7 months before the election campaign. They help the political bosses to win those elections. But what happens post-election? The MPs and the MLAs go to their respective elected houses, but what happens to these people who are left into the system as charged political agents, and they're right in the society? Are they adding value or are they destructing value in the system? That is a question which has really intrigued me, and I've tried to figure out what comes of them, what happens to them, and what sustains them most importantly. So what I've tried, building upon Pareto's theory of elites, political elites. What Pareto's theory says that in a political movement, and all elections, by the way, are more or less political movements. So what happens to them is, during the political movement, a lot of masses tend to evolve themselves and become the governing elites. So they have a very swift journey from the governed masses to the governed elites. And this is where Pareto stops. And I wanted to build more upon this. And I believe that this process is a continuum. A lot of people strive to go up to the governing elites, but they do not end up being the governing elite. Most of them are stuck in this limbo, which is between the two, the elites and the masses. And they remain in an animated suspension. They are there, they're existing, who they themselves don't believe that they're part of the masses, and the governing elites don't believe that they're part of the governing elite. So this animated suspension is what I call as political residues. These political residues are a very important part of the body politic. What happens is these governing elites require these support base, these coterie, to always be there to help them out. Be it dharnas, be it raising an issue, raising a voice, or even strengthening their position in political parties. So they're having a very specific function in the political system. But then the unit economics of these people who are suspended here is something that baffles me. How they do not have any rich avenues for economic resource generation, and their survival is at question. So what I've done is I tried understanding that there has to be a system, howsoever corrupt it is, to sustain them. And what I have mapped here is the governing elites in the vertical cross-section of the body politic are the lions of the system. And if we want to signify the masses, I would do it with sheep. You're left with foxes and vultures who are there in the system. What vultures and foxes tend to do, they are the ones who comprise the political residue. These foxes, they monetize and monopolize access, approach, and proximity to the governing elites. These are the ones who are sitting in the chief minister's office and the prime minister's office and the minister's offices and trying to monetize not just economically but also socially and politically the closeness or the proximity to the ones who are there in the elites. These vultures are a step lower on this hierarchy or of the body politic, and what they do is they merely survive on the crumbs of power. They're the ones who are dwelling in the villages. They click selfies with a minister and then they show it around in these villages, and they tend to even monetize these things. I mean, it's surprising, but they do tend to monetize any symbols of access that they have. If I were to do a horizontal cross-section of the body politic, it comprises of two classes. The first is there's a whole group of support base of politician who wins the election, and then there is a whole support base of the politician who loses the election. What happens to the support base of these two type of politicians post-election? What I call this group, which actually wins the election, definitely has an advantage, and he or she really wants to monetize and build upon on this proximity, closeness, or what you call as a rentier-based model. They are the ones who are advising the senior leadership of the decision-making bodies on which policies to follow, how to follow, and then they do those policy-level manipulations and what also might result into corruption. However, what happens on these speculative classes? Now, the rentier class really likes status quo. They want their bosses, the political bosses, to stay in the system and want to perpetuate the system so that they can reap the benefits of that system. But then the one who loses, and the entire support base which actually loses, and I call them the speculative classes, are the ones who keep poking the system and try to see which one are the weak point. The entire, the Gorakshaks and what you see as the left-based extremism, all these people who are not in the mainstay of perpetuating the system, they tend to destruct the system. And remember, both these groups, the speculative group and the rentier group, are important to the political system in an overall stability and an overall equilibrium of the system. However, they do not add any constructive value to the system. They are there for quid pro quo. They are there for not just giving to an ideology, but also taking it from them. And this is where massive amount of corruption happens. Most often the corruption that we talk about is either at the absolute policy level where the Nira Radiyas of the system are operating at, or absolutely at the retail level where public service-based transaction is happening and corruption around that system is happening. But there is this entire body politic sponsored corruption which is happening unabated, and none of the reforms that our leaders are talking about this system. How does these lacks of political parties, political supporters sustain in a system once the election is over? Where do they go? Where do they go back to the society? And what happens to them in terms of generating gainful employment? So none of the think tanks and the senior leadership of political parties have started thinking around them. One way that I have tried to propose a way to kind of, it is definitely not the panacea to all the ills in the political system, but one way out of this ills could be that we promote more volunteerism, professional volunteers joining politics, wherein people who are working their regular jobs, they take 2 months of break, come and serve an idea or set of ideas or ideology in a system, give to the system because they strongly believe in an idea and not necessarily take from the system. And then post-elections they go back to their respective employment or wherever they've come from. as opposed to the full-timers that are there existing in the system, who clearly are maligning the politics in the country. And it is not just true here in this country. This entire shape of the body politic is inherently flawed, and our leadership has to take charge of promoting volunteerism over political opportunism. So that's the thought that I wanted to leave you with. Thank you.